Apple has an all-new MacBook Air that'll be dropping tomorrow, and I've been using this midnight colored version for a week straight as my main laptop. Now there is a lot to talk about here, so let's jump right in, starting with the unboxing. The MacBook Air arrived in this cardboard box with brown tape on one side, and that was my first mistake. I used this knife to cut through the tape, and when I opened it up, it turned out that I also cut into the box itself. Now I know when it comes to Apple products, we want to keep those boxes in pristine condition, so don't be like me. On the inside of the box, you'll find the MacBook Air right on top, and setting that aside, you also have the 35-watt dual USB-C charger. So you can use this to charge up the MacBook Air, and it also has an extra port you can use to charge another device at the same time without having to use one of the ports on the Air itself to do so. There's also an optional 67-watt USB-C power adapter that enables fast charging, giving you 50% charge in 30 minutes, and that's honestly the one I personally choose over the 35-watt dual port charger myself. If you bump up from the base model MacBook Air, they give you a choice of which charger you want. If you want fast charging, go with that 67-watt version. Now inside the sleeve, we have some info on the MacBook Air along with a couple of black Apple stickers. I assume black because this is the midnight color, and if you get a different finish, I'd imagine you'd have different colored stickers as well. Then there's the MagSafe cable. These are color matched to the finish of the MacBook Air that you choose. They're MagSafe on one side and USB-C on the other, so you can use other USB-C chargers as long as they provide the appropriate amount of power. Now let's talk a bit about this new design. This new M2 MacBook Air gives us the first major redesign since 2010. So for 12 years, Apple had been using the now iconic tapered design that we've all become accustomed to on the MacBook Air. But now that tapering is gone, replaced with an enclosure that sees even thickness all around. It's kind of like a miniaturized version of the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which is a good thing in my opinion. The new Air is just 11 millimeters thick and weighs 2.7 pounds, which is crazy. When you first pick it up, it's odd. It almost feels like an empty shell of a laptop or like a toy. It's 20% smaller in overall volume when compared to the M1 and Intel MacBook Airs. You get a headphone jack with support for high impedance headphones on the right and 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the left, alongside a MagSafe connector for charging. Now on the previous model, you had to use one of the 2 Thunderbolt ports for charging, so this is a very welcome change, as is the full-size function key row and Touch ID button on the keyboard. Now, of course, one of the biggest design changes happened on the inside, which brings me to the Apple M2 chip. The new MacBook Air ushers in the next generation of Apple Silicon. Apple changed the game with the M1, and with the M2, you're getting even more power in a few ways. While the base M2 chip sports an 8-core CPU and 8-core GPU with 256 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM, the model I've been testing is the more powerful 10-core GPU version and has 512 gigabytes of storage, but stays at that 8 gigabytes base RAM. The new M2 chip offers about 1.5 times the performance of the M1 model depending on the task, if you pick the one with an 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU. It should be noted that this costs an extra $100 over the base M2. You do have the option of bumping up to 16 gigabytes of RAM for $200, which is where the M1 stopped, but the M2 offers an additional 24 gigabyte option for $400, giving you 50% more RAM at the top end than you could get on M1. Next up, let's talk about the display. The 13.3-inch display from the previous model has been enlarged a bit, bringing the diagonal screen size to 13.6 inches on the new version. That 0.3 inches might not sound like a lot on paper, but it does give you the feeling of having more room to work with, especially with the menu bar brought up and out of the way. This also means that the bezel size has been greatly reduced in order to accommodate the new larger screen, and you'll also find a new 1080p camera, up from 720p, inside of the display cutout at the top, similar to the MacBook Pro. The display is also 20% brighter, hitting 500 nits of brightness, and it can actually go down to 2 nits of brightness if you want to dim it. And it also supports P3 wide color, giving it the ability to display a billion colors. Now, the best way to test this, in my opinion, is just by watching videos and looking at photos. While the display on the Air doesn't touch what you'd get on the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, those are also a lot more expensive. This is a great display for a computer at this price point. Oh, and when watching videos, you'll experience the new 4-speaker array, which are compatible with spatial audio and Dolby Atmos. It's not as good as what you'd find in a dedicated Atmos setup, or again, on Apple's more expensive computers. But the sound here is very good and is a marked improvement over the M1 and Intel-based Airs. Now, in my opinion, no matter how cool a laptop is supposed to be, I need the display, keyboard, and trackpad to be absolutely on point. And for the MacBook Air, I'm happy to say that it meets those basic requirements. There was a time a couple of years ago where Apple's keyboards were questionable to say the least, but they've righted that wrong, and the full height function row with Touch ID here makes the typing experience feel premium. Okay, so what about actually using the M2 MacBook Air? I was definitely excited to test video editing on this computer. The M2 chip provides 38% faster video editing performance and 20% faster image filters and effects performance, which just sounds nuts for a machine so thin and without a fan. Now, I know this isn't what everyone does on their machines, and it's certainly not what most people buy a MacBook Air to do, but video editing is taxing and is something I'm very comfortable doing, so it would give me a good sense of any hiccups in performance. Now, I record these videos in 6K, allowing me the ability to zoom in and out without losing resolution when exporting to 4K. Opening projects and editing on the Air felt easy, and content played back like butter. Super smooth when both playing and when scrubbing through the timeline. This is something you would never have even tried on the most powerful Intel-based MacBook Air. I was impressed. Now, impressed enough to replace my 16-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro with the M2 Air? No. But impressed that Apple's entry-level M2 is this good, which only means great things for the M2 Pro, M2 Max, and M2 Ultra. Speaking of which, it should be stated that the M2 is a direct successor to the M1, but the other chips like M1 Pro, M1 Max, and M1 Ultra found in the MacBook Pro and Mac Studio are more powerful and have more benefits over the M2. It should also be said that if you're still on an Intel-based MacBook Air, the M2 model is up to 15 times faster than what you're using today. Up next, let's quickly go over these new colors. There's silver, which is the most classic of the MacBook Air colors. Space gray is still here for those wanting something subtly darker, but not too dark. Apple's new Starlight color that we've seen on some other devices makes its debut on the MacBook Air, basically just replacing the gold option in my opinion. And lastly, Midnight also comes to the MacBook Air, giving you a much more bold, dark color for those who like that look. That's specifically the color I chose because it's such a departure from anything else in Apple's laptop lineup. Similar to Midnight on other devices, it basically looks black until you hold it up in just the right light, where you realize that it's really a very rich, deep blue color. Now at WWDC, I thought the Midnight units were fingerprint magnets. It still does pick them up, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near as bad, I guess, as when hundreds of people are touching it back to back to back. A quick wipe down, if you don't like it, gets rid of them and it's fine. Okay, next, let's talk about another important one, battery life. According to Apple, the new MacBook Air gets up to 18 hours of battery life, which is similar to the previous generation model, but that is just based on watching videos with all radios turned off. And I don't know anyone who actively shuts down Wi-Fi and Bluetooth when watching videos, especially since most people are streaming them. Now in my test, just using the MacBook Air for typical tasks, so taking video editing out of this equation. Typical tasks would be my day-to-day stuff: email, web browsing, messaging, Discord, Slack, RSS reader, calendar, those types of things. I saw just over 14 hours of battery life, give or take. That is still great and definitely feels like all-day battery life to me. Basically, if I had to go into an office, I could take my fully charged MacBook Air with me, and I won't even need to plug in during the typical 8-hour workday. And seriously, for a computer this thin to have that much battery life, once again, it's just a testament to Apple Silicon and what they've been able to do here. Now, those are my initial impressions, but of course, a more in-depth review is coming as well. We're just getting started with the M2 MacBook Air. Let me know your thoughts on the new Air in the comments below, along with any questions you have for the review. Thanks for watching as always. I'm Andru, and I'll catch you in the next video.